My son-in-law stood up at my daughter's wedding reception, tapped his champagne glass until the whole room went quiet, and said into the microphone, "I just want everyone to know that Chloe finally has a real father figure in her life." He smiled. Everyone laughed. I sat at the head table in my rented suit and said nothing. I didn't say a word. I just picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. He had no idea what he had just done. Before I tell you what happened next, let me introduce myself. My name is Leonard, and I am 67 years old. I was born in Hamilton, Ontario, the son of a machinist and a school secretary. I spent 32 years as a civil engineer for the city of Toronto, and then another decade quietly building something else entirely, something nobody at that wedding reception knew about. Not my daughter, not her new husband, not my ex-wife, who was sitting 2 tables away laughing along with everyone else. They all thought they knew who I was. They were wrong. Let me go back to the beginning. My daughter Chloe is 34. She has her mother's eyes and, unfortunately, her mother's habit of measuring people by the wrong things. I raised her mostly alone after her mother and I divorced, when Chloe was 11. Her mother moved to Vancouver with a man who sold commercial real estate and had opinions about wine. I stayed in Mississauga. I packed Chloe's lunches, drove her to figure skating practice at 5:30 in the morning, helped her with calculus homework at the kitchen table while eating takeout from the Thai place on her Ontario. I was not a flashy father. I drove a used Accord. I wore the same winter coat for 11 years. I fixed things myself instead of calling contractors. When the neighbors got a new deck built, I built my own over 3 weekends with lumber from Home Depot and a YouTube tutorial. Chloe used to think this was charming when she was young. Somewhere around her late 20s, she stopped finding it charming. She met her husband, whose name is Preston, at a corporate event in the financial district. He works in private equity and wears suits that cost more than my first car. He has the kind of confident ease that comes either from genuine accomplishment or from never once having to worry about money. I was not certain which one applied to Preston. I tried, for Chloe's sake, to give him the benefit of the doubt. The first time we met, at a dinner at their condo in the distillery district, he shook my hand and said, "So you're the engineer," the way someone might say. "So you're the one who fixes the photocopier." Chloe laughed and squeezed his arm. I smiled. I let it go. Over the next 2 years, there were more moments like that. Comments about my neighborhood. Questions about whether I was still renting delivered with a kind of theatrical surprise when I explained I owned my house outright. When I mentioned I was doing some consulting work, Preston nodded slowly with the expression of a man being polite to a child, explaining how airplanes stay up. The worst was at Christmas, 2 years before the wedding. We were all at Chloe's condo. Her mother had driven in from Vancouver. Preston's parents were there too. His father, a retired Bay Street lawyer, his mother on the board of 2 arts foundations. Preston gave a little speech over dinner. He talked about his year, the deal he'd closed, a property acquisition in Whistler. He talked about his vision for the future, about building something that lasts, and he looked at his father and at me in the same sentence, with a very specific kind of look. The look that divides the room into people who understand vision and people who spent their lives working for someone else. Then he said it. He was talking about mentorship, about the importance of having strong men around you as models, and he looked right at Chloe and said, "You know, I think about what it means to give a child real opportunities, real exposure. I want our kids to grow up knowing what ambition actually looks like." Nobody said anything. Chloe smiled into her wine glass. Her mother nodded. I looked at my plate. I wanted very much to say something. I wanted to explain exactly what ambition looked like from where I was sitting, but I didn't. I had spent my whole life believing that quiet dignity was its own kind of answer, that the work would eventually speak. It didn't. So at the wedding reception, when Preston stood up without microphone and told 200 people that Chloe had finally found a real father figure, something shifted in me. Something very old and very patient, finally, quietly, stopped being patient. I didn't make a scene. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I set down my water glass very carefully on the white tablecloth. I folded my napkin, and I thought, all right then. Let's see what happens when I stop picking up the phone. Because what Preston didn't know, what nobody at that reception knew, was that I had a partner. His name is Howard, and he had been my university roommate at McMaster in 1979. We had stayed friends for 46 years. In 2009, when the recession hit and Howard's development company was struggling, I had quietly invested $300,000 of my savings, the money I'd been putting away since my 30s, into his company. Not a loan. A partnership. Equal shares. I had told no one, not Chloe, not her mother, not my sister. I liked the privacy of it. I had been invisible for so long that invisibility felt comfortable. Howard's company, Gallagher Fitch Development, rebuilt itself over the following decade. We were careful. We bought properties in mid-sized Ontario cities that were being overlooked. Guelph, Kitchener, Barrie. We developed modestly. We held long. When the real estate market in southern Ontario caught fire between 2015 and 2022, we didn't sell. We leased. Residential and commercial. By the time of Chloe's wedding reception, Gallagher Fitch was generating, between Howard and me, more income each month than Preston made in a quarter. He had given his speech about real father figures. I had listened. I drove home to Mississauga in my Accord, the same one I'd had for 8 years, and I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. I looked at the framed photo on the windowsill. Chloe at 7, gap-toothed, holding a fish she'd caught at the cottage we'd rented up near Parry Sound. She was laughing so hard she could barely hold the rod. I didn't feel angry exactly. I felt tired, and I felt clear. The next morning, I called Howard. We talked for 40 minutes. When I hung up, some things had changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly, the way I tend to do things. The first thing that changed was Chloe's parking spot. She had mentioned, 8 months earlier, that she and Preston had been having trouble with the condo fees. The building had levied a special assessment for a new roof, something like $12,000 per unit. She hadn't asked me directly for money, but she'd mentioned it twice. The third time I'd quietly offered to cover it for her. I had been paying the assessment monthly, an automated transfer I had set up through my account. I had also, for the previous 2 years, been helping with the property tax on a small investment property Preston had bought in his name, but couldn't quite service. The arrangement was informal. A family loan, no documentation, just trust. I called my bank the morning after the wedding and stopped both transfers. I did not tell Chloe. I waited. It took 11 days. She called on a Tuesday evening. Her voice had that particular quality it gets when she's trying to sound casual about something that is not casual. Dad, hey. Quick question. Did something happen with the bank? The automatic transfer didn't come through this month for the condo assessment. Did it not? I said. Yeah, it's just, I got a notice from the property management office. I said. There was a pause. Is everything okay with your account? Everything's fine with my account, I said. My voice was even. It was the voice I used in 30 years of meetings with city councilors and contractors and people who thought an engineer was just someone who ran numbers. I've just been doing some restructuring, reviewing my commitments. Restructuring, she repeated. Another pause, longer this time. Dad, the notice is pretty urgent. There's a late fee now, and if we don't resolve it by the end of the month. You should talk to Preston, I said pleasantly. He's very good with financial matters. He's a visionary. I'm sure he'll sort it out. I heard her breath catch, just slightly. What does that mean? It means I think you and your husband can handle this, I said. You have a real father figure now. I'm sure between the two of you you'll figure it out. I said it without any heat, without any edge I could be accused of. I said it like a man making a reasonable observation. She didn't know what to say. She said she'd call me back. She didn't call back for 4 days. When she did, Preston was also on the call. I could tell by the quality of the silence on the other end, that particular held breath quality of someone listening who hasn't announced themselves. Preston wanted to talk about the investment property. He was careful about it. He spoke in the calm, reasonable tone of a man who is very used to being the smartest person in a negotiation. "Leonard," he said, and the use of my name felt deliberate, a kind of establishing of equal footing. I wanted to touch base about the informal arrangement we had around the Oakville property. I know it was loosely structured, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page. "Of course," I said. "The property's doing well. We're on track for a solid return. I just want to make sure the support you've been providing is continuing on the same terms." "What terms were those?" I asked. A brief silence. "The monthly contributions," he said. "I don't believe we ever formalized any terms," I said. "Did we?" Another silence, slightly longer. "No," he said. "It was informal." "Right," I said. "And informally, I've been reviewing my financial commitments. I'm at a stage in life where I need to be more thoughtful about where my resources go." I paused. "I hope you understand." There was a very long silence. "Leonard," Preston said, and his voice had lost its boardroom smoothness, "are you saying you're pulling out?" "I'm saying I'm restructuring," I said, "as I mentioned to Chloe." I heard Chloe's voice in the background, a sharp, urgent whisper. "We're in the middle of a property cycle," Preston said. "This timing is—" "I'm sure you'll manage," I said. "You're very capable. You've told us all quite a bit about your vision." And then I said goodbye and I ended the call. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat by the kitchen window. Outside, the maple in the backyard was beginning to turn. That maple had been there when I bought the house in 1998. I had never once thought about cutting it down. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was something more like the release of something very heavy I had been carrying for a long time without realizing how much it weighed. 2 weeks passed. Then Preston called again, this time without Chloe. His voice was different. The polish was still there, but underneath it something had shifted, something tight and pressured. He said the Oakville property had hit a complication, a zoning issue that would delay the rental income by at least 2 quarters. He said the condo assessment was still outstanding, and the management company had sent a formal notice. He said things were a bit tight right now, and he wanted to understand if there was any possibility of continuing the previous arrangement, even temporarily. "Preston," I said, and I made sure to use his name the same way he always used mine, deliberate, leveling. "I'm just a retired engineer from Mississauga. I'm not sure why you'd come to me with this." "Because you've been helping us," he said, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard before, something almost raw. "I was happy to help when I could," I said, "but I think it's time for you and Chloe to find your footing on your own. That's what you want for your future children, isn't it? Real exposure to what ambition looks like." He didn't say anything. "You're going to be fine," I said. "You have vision." I heard the speech. I could hear him breathing. "Was that what this is about?" he finally said. "The speech at the wedding?" "I have no idea what you mean," I said pleasantly. "I'm just reassessing my retirement planning. Take care of yourself, Preston." I hung up. That Saturday, Chloe called. Not in the careful, managed way of the previous weeks. She called the way she used to call when she was 15, and something had gone wrong at school, voice a little unsteady, words coming faster than usual. "Dad, I need to talk to you. Not about the money. I mean, about everything." I drove to her condo in the Distillery District. I parked the Accord in visitor parking. I rode the elevator up. She buzzed me in. She was alone. Preston was out. She had made coffee and the apartment was very quiet. She looked tired. She looked, honestly, more like herself than she had at the wedding. At the wedding, she had been performing. Now she was just sitting at her kitchen table in a sweatshirt, her hair up, looking at her hands. "He's been managing things," she said. "The finances. He always said he had it handled. I believed him. She looked up. The Oakville property is more complicated than he told me. There's not just the zoning issue. There's a second mortgage I didn't know about. I nodded slowly. How bad? I said. Not catastrophic, but not nothing. She looked at her coffee. He was embarrassed to tell me. He said he thought the deal would resolve before I needed to know. I said. She was quiet for a moment. Dad, she said, that speech he gave. You don't have to. No, I do. She looked at me directly. I should have said something. Right then, I heard it and I let it go. I don't know why I let it go. It was your wedding, I said. It was embarrassing, she said quietly, to you, and I just sat there. I looked at my daughter. I thought about the fish she caught near Perry Sound. I thought about calculus at the kitchen table. I thought about every 5:30 morning. I know who you are, Dad, she said. I do. I just got lazy about showing it. I didn't say anything for a while. Outside, it was a gray November morning, the kind Toronto does very well, the kind I have always liked better than I'm supposed to. The condo assessment, I said finally. I'll cover it this month while you get sorted. She shook her head. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I picked up my coffee. But you're my daughter and you need a hand right now. That's different from covering things up indefinitely so someone else can take credit for the stability I built. She was quiet for a moment. The Oakville property, she said. Preston is going to have to deal with that himself. Yes, I said. He is. She nodded. And then she said, Dad, what is it you actually do? Howard called me last week. He said you were his partner. He said Gallagher Fitch. What? She said some numbers, Dad. Big numbers. And She stopped. How long? Since 2009, I said. She stared at me. You've been. She stopped again. All this time. I didn't see the point in making a big thing of it, I said. Howard does the day-to-day. I provide capital and occasionally useful opinions. It's a quiet arrangement. Dad. Her voice was careful now, the way you speak when you're recalibrating your whole understanding of something. The consulting you mentioned, was that? Partly, I said, and partly the partnership, and partly a few other things I've put together over the years. She looked at the table. Preston has no idea, she said. No, I said. She was quiet for a long time. The coffee cooled. Outside, a streetcar went by. He thinks you needed the family loan structure because you couldn't manage on your own, she said slowly. I know, I said. He's going to feel like an idiot, she said. That's a choice he made, I said. I didn't make it for him. I didn't hear from Preston directly for almost 3 weeks. When he finally called, it was a Sunday afternoon, and his voice was quiet. Controlled, but in the way of something controlled by effort rather than by ease. The polish was gone. What was underneath it was something more real and considerably more humble. He apologized. Not a smooth, managed apology, a stumbling one, which is the only kind worth anything. He said the speech had been wrong. He said he had been performing, which he knew even as he was doing it, and he had let it go further than he should have. He said Chloe had told him, in no uncertain terms, what she thought of it on the drive home from the reception. He said he had told himself the apology could wait, and then it kept waiting, the way apologies do when you're embarrassed enough to keep putting them off. I listened without saying much. Then he said, Howard mentioned you have a meeting set up in Guelph next month, a new acquisition. That's right, I said. I'd like to hear about it sometime, he said. Not? He stopped. Not asking for anything. Just, I'd like to understand what you actually do. There was a silence. Come to Guelph, I said. Howard will explain the model. Bring your questions. Leave the boardroom voice at home. He said he would. He did. Watching Preston in Howard's side office in Guelph, asking real questions and listening to the actual answers was something I hadn't expected to find interesting. but I did. When you strip away the performance, there is sometimes something underneath worth talking to. Whether that will be true in Preston's case in the long run, I genuinely don't know. That's not something I can decide for him. What I know is this. I spent 32 years as a public servant in this country, doing careful, unglamorous work that kept infrastructure standing and water running and roads from cracking apart ahead of schedule. I spent another decade building something quiet and durable, because I understood, the way engineers understand things, that what holds isn't what shines. It's what's anchored properly at the foundation. Nobody stood at any dinner and gave a speech about that. But it was there, every month, like clockwork, in the transfers I made and the decisions I didn't publicize, and the patience I exercised when someone younger and louder got the credit. I'm 67 years old. I drive in Accord. I still fix things myself when I can. I have a partner named Howard and a daughter named Chloe and a son-in-law who is, slowly, learning the difference between performing confidence and earning it. The maple in my backyard is older than Chloe. It has never once asked anyone for permission to keep growing. Neither have I. If you have ever been in that room, the room where someone who doesn't know you dismisses you, and you have to decide whether to say something or just keep building, then you already know that the quiet answer is sometimes the only one that lasts. Share your story in the comments. And if this meant something to you, subscribe. There are more stories where this one came from. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the speech, not the phone calls. It's Chloe at that kitchen table in her sweatshirt, looking at her hands, saying, "I should have said something." Right then. That's the moment that mattered most to me, not because it fixed anything, but because it was honest. And honesty, when it finally comes, has a particular weight to it that nothing else quite matches. I've thought a lot about what went wrong, and I don't think it was Preston, not entirely. Preston was doing what people do when they've been told their whole lives that loudness equals strength. He performed confidence the way he'd seen it performed, and for a long time it worked well enough that he never had to examine it. That's not evil. That's just a man who hasn't been asked the right questions yet. What I failed to do for too long was ask them. I spent decades believing that doing the work quietly was its own kind of dignity, and it is. But there's a difference between quiet dignity and quiet disappearance. When you let the people around you build a story about who you are, and you never correct it, you aren't being humble. You're just letting a lie stand. I let that lie stand for years, in my daughter's home, at Christmas dinners, across tables where I could have simply said, "Here is what I actually do. Here is what I've actually built," not to brag, just to tell the truth. The three things I keep coming back to, looking back on all of it, are these. The first is character. Not the kind you talk about, but the kind that shows up in what you do when no one is watching. When the money moves and nobody announces it. When the work gets done at 5:30 in the morning and the credit goes somewhere else. Character is what you're left with when the performance stops. The second is judgment. Real judgment. Not the kind that comes from reading a market or closing a deal, but the kind that comes from sitting with a problem long enough to understand it from the inside out. Howard and I didn't build anything remarkable because we were aggressive. We built it because we were patient and we paid attention. Judgment is slow. It doesn't announce itself. But it compounds, the same way interest compounds, quietly and without stopping. The third is staying power. Preston talked about vision. Vision is easy. Staying power is what you need when the deal goes sideways and the zoning changes and the market does something nobody predicted. Staying power is what got me through 32 years of public service and a divorce and a divorce and as times forgot, for a while, to look past the surface of things. Chloe remembered. That's what I hold on to. She sat at that table and told me the truth, and that took something real from her. I'm proud of her for it in a way I couldn't quite articulate at the time. I'm articulating it now. The maple in my backyard is still there. It doesn't ask for anything. It just keeps growing. I think that's about right.